All right, good morning. How is everybody?
Good, how are you?
Good. So on Thursday, we have the third exam. So on Thursday, you'll have class time to take the third exam. So you don't need to come to class that day. I will have the exam posted on D2L by Thursday. Again, it's the same format as the others, and you can use any resources you want because there may be an essay that requires you to cite. Also, there may be math on this one, so you'll be using a calculator for the price equations. So it'll be up by Thursday. I know that there's one that's on there that's from the last semester. If you do that, you're just gonna have your score reset because I've got to go in and create a new exam because we're not gonna get through channels marketing today. So just be aware of that. It'll be live by class time on Thursday, and I will let you know if it's live before then. Again, if you go in and you take the exam now, it's just going to get wiped out because that's not the one for this semester. Every semester things happen, and I have to switch exams or switch chapters covering coverage just by a chapter or two maybe. And this time we're not going to be able to get through price and get through channels today. So the channels marketing will not be on the third exam. You'll just go through the price chapters. Yes.
You still give us a week to do it, correct?
Yes, you'll have a week to do it, but it will be live by Thursday at class time, and you have class time to do it. So, all right. So we need to talk about price today. We'll move over to that one.
Bless you.
Bless you. Bless you. Somebody's got allergies. Everybody's got allergies right now, it seems like. And everybody starts dodging every time somebody sneezes, it's like, oh, someone's got COVID. It's probably just seasonal allergies. So this is one of my least favorite topics, along with channels, to talk about. So we'll talk about channels on a week from today, on next Tuesday, when we come back and you started on the third exam. The reason I don't like channels is because it's really boring. It's an old field in marketing and it's not a real fun field. The reason I don't like talking about price is because of all of the 4 Ps. It is the one that is probably the most critical, but it does not have a good theoretical or unifying theory as to why you should select the price that you charge. Obviously, the price has to be right, and you have to have enough money to cover your costs, but there is no a priori unifying theory where price is concerned. It's sort of like in finance, there is no good theory as to how you should structure your capital foundation of your business. There are 2 ways that you can structure capital in a business. You can either do it through debt or equity. And there's no a priori unifying theory as to why you should choose one over the other. And so there are not good theories with regard to pricing models, and I tend to be a theory guy. So with regard to things like channels marketing and logistics, we have very good models. Now those models, what you can see is that they become, when we talk about this, they become fragile because of things like just-in-time inventory control, and we'll talk more about that. But there is a model there that we can use to guide us in making those kinds of decisions. With regard to price, there isn't. When we get to promotion, which is the part of marketing that everybody thinks of as being marketing, there's a good model. There's a good unifying theory. It's called integrated marketing communication. And so we have a unifying theory for that portion of it. When we come to production, or the product itself, we have good models as to what you should do in order to bring a product to market and launch it and have the greatest opportunity of success. With price, we don't have any of that. It's just, there's no unifying theory. There's no reason why you should do one price over another, other than to say that you have to have enough to cover your costs. If you don't at least do that, you're going to go broke. But that's sort of the only rule, is that you have to cover costs or you're not going to stay in business. Although Chesapeake has managed to stay in business by not covering costs for decades now, right? I mean, they've got a model that is just totally reliant upon debt, and they're still there. And I have no idea how they've managed to hang on, but they have. So why is price so important? Well, it represents the sacrifice of what you are willing to give up in order to get something. And it's always fascinating to me. And one of the reasons I told you that I like the state fair is because you get to see at the state fair what people would rather have than their own money. I like my own money. And so it's always amazing to me what kinds of knickknacks and tchotchkes and Cupid dolls people will buy rather than keeping their own money. And it's just a fascinating experience. So it represents what you're willing to give up in order to get the products and services that you need and desire. It's where all of the other business decisions come together, because this is where it represents what it costs the business to produce it and what you're willing to sacrifice. So all of these other decisions regarding promotion, regarding production, and regarding how we get the product to you are all represented in the price that you pay. So it can be barter. A lot of international trade is actually done in barter. The United States is the world's reserve currency. This occurred after the Bretton Woods Accords, after World War II, when it was decided that most countries would peg their currency to the United States. The British actually wanted it to be on the pound sterling, and it was chosen the United States because we had a larger economy. Will we always be the world's reserve currency? No, probably not. But we are, for the current time being, we are the world's reserve currency. In 1973, Richard Nixon floats the dollar. So it used to be after Bretton Woods that the dollar was tied to a specific amount of specie, which was gold. And that is no longer true. So what backs up the dollar? Do you need something?
I plug my enrollment 1 minute.
Yeah, sure.
Thank y'all. Just a reminder, you all, my name is Nicole Miller. I work in the Student Success Center, and we help you all get enrolled and get jobs and hopefully all those really fun things. So priority enrollment opens November 1st. If you haven't seen your advisor yet, we've got some appointments available. And if we don't have one available at the time that you need, we'll start taking walk-in and same day availability next week. So come see us. I'll write on the board that information. And then also there's a contest going on that you would have received information for if you're a business major, called the I Enrolled contest. There are 3 $1,000 tuition waivers up for grabs. So hopefully you get to be one of the lucky ones. Come get a sticker from our office, put it on your chest, take a picture, post it on Instagram, and tag us during your giveaway window. And hopefully you get to be one of the lucky ones to either get a tuition waiver or maybe some COB swag. So anyway, hope you all have a great rest of the class. Thanks for checking.
You want to write it up there?
Yeah.
After she gets done, I'll walk over there so that people on the online in our live broadcast section can see it. Yeah. So hopefully, in case you can't see it on the camera, because I'm not sure if it will show up, Student Success Center is in business 222. You can search business advisement, and their number is 405-974-2325, enrolled between November 1st and 23rd. And again, if you do priority enrollment, you have an opportunity to win those tuition dollars. So I was talking about price and barter and the United States being the world reserve currency. Lots of countries, particularly in the developing world, don't have enough dollars, but they have resources that they want to sell. And so a lot of the world's trade is actually done in barter, in terms of exchanging something for something else. And we see this even today in post-industrial societies. Every Saturday, for example, in my hometown in Guthrie, outside the Beacon Drive-In, they have a flea market and swap meet, and people will trade stuff for other stuff if they don't have money, or that, and that's a barter system. So the example I use is the Kenyan shilling. The Kenyan shilling is the currency that they have in Kenya. What's it worth outside of Kenya? Nothing. Nobody wants Kenya shillings, right? Nobody wants Mexican pesos. They want US dollars, but we may want the stuff that they have, and so you actually will see a lot of barter engaged in international trade. So the price equation and value. So the price equation, and this is where you may have to do some math, is the list price minus incentives and allowances plus extra fees. This is one of the best model to think about price is cars. You all have gone and bought a car probably if you're in this class, because we don't have great public transportation in Oklahoma. I was going to try and take the bus. There was a bus stop when I lived in Edgemere, in Oklahoma City. There was a bus stop right outside my house, and I thought, well, I'll be adventuresome and I'll take the bus some morning to UCO. And in order to get here, I was the associate general counsel, and in order to get here at 8 o'clock in the morning on the bus, I would have had to have gotten on the bus at 4:30 in the morning. And I decided I was just not that adventuresome. I didn't want to do it that badly. But in order to get to UCO, because it went from my house and it made several stops along the way until it got down to the bus terminal, basically. And then you caught another bus that went north to the campus, and it stopped all along the route. In order to get here at 8, you had to be on the bus 4 hours. So we don't have great public transportation. So almost everybody in this room has probably purchased a car. Now, even if you haven't purchased a new car, there's all of these things on the sticker price. Now, if you've purchased a new car, there is something called the MSRP on that sticker. And that is probably not going to be the price that you pay, the MSRP, right? That's the manufacturer's suggested retail price. But they give all kinds of incentives depending on when you buy your car to buy cars. Now, they're not giving any incentives right now because there's a chip shortage. And if you go to any of the car dealerships, particularly new car dealerships, their lots are virtually empty because there are not enough. They have stopped production because they have not gotten enough of the chips that run, modern cars. And so there are not going to be a whole lot of incentives and allowances. But in normal times, when the supply chain hasn't been disrupted, as we've seen as a result of COVID and the trade wars with China, which we'll talk about the supply chain next time, they offer incentives and allowances to get you to buy cars. If you, for example, are a current GM owner, they will oftentimes give you an incentive to go back and buy another GM car or a Ford car if you're a Ford owner. So you'll go into the car dealership and they'll say, well, are you a current Ford or a GM owner if you're going to a GM dealer or a Ford dealer? And they'll say, well, we've got $1,000, same as cash incentive for current GM owners if they'll trade in and finance their car. So you have these incentives and allowances, and then there will be all of these extra fees that you'll see in the sticker price of the car. That's dealer prep. That's transportation fees, handling fees, the document fees in terms of charging you for putting together the documents to do tag, title, and tax and financing and things like that. So you'll take your list price minus incentives and allowances and then any extra fees, and that's the price. The value equation is the perceived benefits that you get divided by the price. And 84% of US consumers say that price is an indicator of quality, that the higher the price, the more quality the product probably is. And with some things, that's definitely true, but with others, is it necessarily true? With regard to, for example, shirts and shoes, Nike doesn't manufacture shoes. Nike is a designer. They did, for a very brief period of time, actually manufacture their own shoes. But I see you've got a pair of Nikes on there. I think, no, I don't. I have Merrell's on today. But I've had lots of Nike shoes over the years. They, at one point in time, actually did manufacture their own shoes. They stopped because it was cheaper to outsource that production to places like China and Taiwan and the Philippines. And so Nike doesn't actually manufacture their own shoes. They design them and they're manufactured in other places where they also manufacture other shoes. Are there big differences in quality between the Nike shoes and the other brands of shoes that they manufacture at those places? Probably not. A big portion of what you're paying for is the Nike brand image. Now, there are some things where there are higher qualities and you're going to pay higher prices. What are things that price is a good indicator of quality? Again, things like textiles and shirts. And again, in the past, you might have been able to go in and the average American might have been able to tell by looking and feeling the quality of a shirt and looking at the stitching on it, whether or not that was a quality made product. But most of you don't know anything about sewing anymore. When my mother was growing up, she made a lot of her own clothes and she learned how to sew and she could look at fabric. She made all of our Halloween costumes for years and we won. My brother and I won every single year. She made these elaborate costumes for us. We were E.T. one year when E.T. was very popular. I'm really dating myself by talking about E.T., but she made this incredibly elaborate E.T. costume. She made a shark costume for me one year where I was a great white, and she sewed all of it. And she could tell what was better quality than others, but most people can't anymore. You can't tell the difference between what is the most popular brand of clothing. You know, when I was in college, it was something like Polo by Ralph Lauren or Tommy Hilfiger or something like that. Those were considered to be enormously good brands. They're manufactured in the same place that the Walmart brand of golf shirt is manufactured. Yeah. So what you're really paying for is you're a lot of times paying for the name brand, but consumers perceive quality as being more expensive. Now, where does it get more expensive? In things like jewelry. That's a good example of something where quality, I mean, you're going to pay more for 18 karat gold than you are for 10 karat gold. You're going to pay more for the heavier gold mounting than you are for the lighter gold mounting. But in a lot of things, there's probably very little difference, particularly with regard to a lot of consumer packaged goods. A lot of the things like the cereals, and there used to be all these commercials that would say, if you get down here, because they put the name brand cereals, the General Mills, the Frosted Flakes, things like that on eye level. And if you went down to the bottom where you could see the store brands, there's not a big difference between the shredded wheat and the Frosted Mini Wheats or the mini shredded wheats that they have for the Great Value brand versus the General Mills or the Kellogg's brand. But consumers perceive that higher price equals higher quality. And perception is reality in the mind of the consumer, right? It's one of the reasons why, and I've said this over and over and over again, it's because I like watches and I like jewelry. Rolex doesn't discount and Rolex goes up every single year received as free item. When the Swiss watchmaker Tag Heuer wanted to increase sales, they actually increased the price of their watch. The average price of their watch had been $500. They increased the price to $1,000 and sales went up. Why is that? Because at that point, with a $1,000 watch, it becomes closer to what? It becomes closer to Rolex than it does to Timex. So fees can be difficult to decode. Airline ticket fees. You see the price, and then there are all of the baggage handling fees, the airport fees, the taxes, and things like that that are tagged on, and they can be difficult to decode, and consumers often fail to do the math. Now, lots of companies, for example, Macy's, which is a major department store, is perpetually having things on sale. So let's suppose that you saw a jacket at Macy's that you wanted to buy, and it was $100. We'll do this for simplicity's sake, $100. And they say it's 25% off, and our white sale is an additional 25% off taken at the register. Most consumers will fail to do the math. They will combine 25% and 25%, and they'll come up with it's going to be 50% off. That's not the way it works, right? They don't do the math. So you're going to take 25% off the first $100, right? So you got 25% off. So that's the sale price. That's $75, right? Now you have to take 25% off that, which is $18.75. And you come out with a final sale price of $56 25 if I did my math correctly. That's not 50% off, is it? No, not 50% off. But lots of consumers do this. They don't do the math. They do mental shortcuts and they don't actually do the math to figure it out. So decoding the price can be enormously tricky. Price in the marketing mix. Price affects revenues, how much you're going to sell, and it affects total costs. So again, these are where you may have to do some mental or some actual, not mental calculations, but some actual mathematical calculations to figure out the profit equation. So profit equals the total revenue minus total costs. And usually the way I do this is to make it more complex, is I say it's unit price times quantity. I give you an example that you have to figure this out, minus the fixed costs plus the variable costs. So what are things like fixed costs? For my business, for example, we have fixed costs, which is the amount that it cost us to purchase the business that we are in, the Stone Lion Inn, which we purchased in 1986. And that's a fixed cost, that amount of money that we purchased for the property in 1986 is a fixed cost. What are variable costs? Well, food goes up and down depending on logistics. So the cost of producing, so for our murder mysteries, we offer a 7-course gourmet dinner that comes with the murder mystery. And that price fluctuates because food costs right now are fluctuating widely because of transportation costs. What's happened to gas prices in the last 6 months? They've gone up, right? And so those are variable costs. Labor is also a variable cost. We take up to 40 people for the murder mystery. I have to have the same number of staff to feed 40 as I do to feed 25. If I have 40, my profits are increasing because the labor cost is the same. I've spread it out over a greater number of people, right? So I'll give you examples like that that you have to figure out what the profit is. Price will be determined largely on a company's objectives. Some companies target a profit. Oftentimes, American corporations are accused of being very short-sighted in their pricing objectives. The Japanese price for long-term viability. And this was true when the Japanese entered the market. When I was a kid growing up, nobody wanted a Japanese car. They were viewed as being garbage. They weren't very well made. You wanted an American car. They were small, gas prices were really cheap. In 1973, when I was born, I think the average price of gas in 1973, I have a book that goes back, it's called, Look Back in History, the year you were born. And you can get these books at various places that'll tell you what a loaf of bread was. An average cost of gas in 1973 when I was born, I think was 56 cents a gallon. Right? Really cheap. And so what did people want? They wanted big, heavy, steel American cars. The Japanese actually, and their government supported this, actually priced cars below what it cost to produce them in order to gain traction in the market. And they did. And then the quality got better. And now the perception is, and maybe wrongly so, among lots of people, that the Japanese automobile industry is far superior to the American automobile manufacturing industry. I don't know that that's true. So much has been automated that it's really hard to get a lemon in any automobile. I mean, you can still do it, but they priced for long term. So they forewent immediate profit in order to penetrate what was at that point in time a competitive market for them. Americans have a complete and utter love affair with the car. When I was a foreign exchange student in Germany, The family that I lived with had one car for the family. Why is that? Well, Germany is a small country. Everything was close, and they have fairly decent public transportation there. In America, no family has one car for the most part. How many of you got a car when you were 16? This is something that's fascinating to me that's changed. When I was a kid growing up, how many of you got a car when you were 16? Raise your hands. Okay, so still the majority of you got a car when you were 16. You can't go anywhere in the United States without a car. Again, going back to I lived outside a bus stop where I could catch a public transportation to come to UCO and it would have taken me 4 hours. That's not reasonable. So most of us drive. That's not true in other places. So the American automobile industry and the American car market has been a huge target because in other places they have much better public transportation. So they price competitively to enter that market, to gain a foothold, to get a reputation, to build better vehicles, and to ultimately sell to Americans, because almost every American household has multiple cars. If you have kids, that historically, now this is something that's changed, historically, everybody wanted to drive at 16. It's fascinating to me that your generation didn't care about that. Why would you care about that? You don't need to go anywhere. You've got this. Like, you can play and entertain yourself, and you can get on. And my nephew, for example, doesn't want to go to anybody's house because they all have their own gaming systems and they all want to get together and play Call of Duty or Fortnite or what are the other popular ones now? He plays all of these that are just like, online. And they don't want to go to each other's houses, which that was a big deal when I was a kid. You went to other people's houses to escape your own parents, to get away from your parents, but kids nowadays, they want to stay at home because they've got their gaming system. Return on investment is short term. Oftentimes, this is what small companies focus on, is return on investment. They have to have an immediate return on investment because if they don't, they're going to go under. Quarter over quarter is another short term. A lot of American companies focus on this. Even companies like the company I worked for, we focused on quarter over quarter because we were an SEC reporting company, which meant that we had to report all of our profits and losses and all of our financials every single quarter to the SEC in something called a 10Q. And then at the end of the year, we had to file a 10K. And so companies want to appear, particularly for shareholders, to be doing well. And so they'll oftentimes focus on, and my boss was insistent on it. He was always like, are we better? Are we better than this quarter? And I'd be like, Jeff, you got to stop thinking about this, right? But he was so hellbound and determined to increase investor confidence so that we could sell the company, that he focused on quarter over quarter. Some companies are going to focus on sales, increasing sales. Others will focus on market share. McDonald's, for example, wants to maintain their market share. They have the largest market share of the fast food market in the United States. They're losing in one of their major sectors to Starbucks. And so what are they doing? They're pricing and they're changing their model in order to try and compete and maintain their level of market share, which is really, really hard. When you are the 10,000-pound gorilla, you have no place to go but down. When you have that big a market share, you have no place to go. There isn't a lot of leverage, but they want to maintain it at least, right? Some will price for unit volume. A lot of companies are just pricing for survival. This has become one of the more controversial pricing objectives, social responsibility, and it's influenced a lot. Milton Friedman would be horrified at this. He said that business exists only to make a profit, and that the only legitimate goal of a business is to increase shareholders' wealth. Well, a lot of companies are saying we don't believe in that model necessarily, and we believe in social responsibility. So Tom's is one of the first ones that started this, and they did 1 for 1. So for every pair of shoes you bought, they donated a pair of shoes. Who's followed in the social responsibility model? Bombas has done the same thing, right? For every pair of socks that you buy, they donate a pair of socks to homeless shelters, because socks, as their advertisement says, are the #1 most requested item in homeless shelters, or socks. And they recognize that to your age group specifically, you are far much more socially conscious consumers than even my generation or my parents' generation, where it was just about what can I get for me? And that's not necessarily true of yours. So that's another pricing objective, is social responsibility. Yes,
What do you mean by unit volume?
unit volume, increasing the unit volume of a particular item. So a lot of times items will be priced together. They go with other things, and so you try to increase the number of the unit volume that you're selling of a particular item. So what are things that go together? Bread and peanut butter, right?
Oh, okay.
So trying to increase, and the manufacturers of peanut butter, that's probably a bad example, because manufacturers of peanut butter don't generally manufacture bread, but a lot of products are sold together. So for example, the company that I worked for, we sold a suite of products. So we sold a backbone, which was the LMS, which was like D2L, and then we sold all of these titles that went along with that backbone. So you could purchase the backbone, and then school districts would purchase individual titles that met their needs. So lots of school districts, particularly if they were struggling in math and science, which are heavily tested on the standardized tests, would buy our math and science bundles. And they wouldn't necessarily buy the social science bundles because those are easier. There's lots of social studies teachers out there, or the perception is that anyone can teach social studies. So we would try to increase unit volume and push, for example, trying to increase the volume of sales along with the backbone of social studies products in our company to make that product line competitive. Does that make sense? So we would try to increase the volume. Once you bought this, by adding incentives to increase the volume so that those titles would remain viable. I can give you a prime example of this. We had one product that was, it was called Learning Letter Sounds, and it was the biggest product that we sold, and it was one that we always lost. It was a loss leader. And we would use that in order to increase volume sales of other product lines. And the accounting department constantly wanted us to cut Learning Letter Sounds because there was no profit margin in it. But it was the product that got us into the school district that allowed us then to sell other products and increase the volume of things like social studies titles, history titles, foreign language titles. A lot of school districts, if you're struggling, they don't test on, for example, the standardized tests in the lower levels on foreign language titles. But it's critical that students learn those if they're going to be college bound, because that was historically one of the things that colleges require. So trying to increase the unit volume of those other products along the product line. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I'm going to run down the hall real quick, 1 second, because I want to show them this, because it's doing it. No, it's actually not. It's stayed.
Okay.
And you can see even if I turn off the front, you can't see it.
It is super dark.
Yeah.
Bulb could be dying or something, but.
But I just wanted you to, I'm not crazy.
You're not crazy.
Right. I'm not crazy. It's like
Oh, I
really.
didn't think you were, it's just, I don't wanted to see it,
And I think it's actually getting brighter. It's because I can start to see, and maybe just my eyes are adjusting, but
Well, you did turn the light on, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe replace that bulb or something.
okay. I just wanted to let you guys know.
Yeah,
So that
for sure.
Thanks, I appreciate it. So consumer demand, and you're gonna have a hard time seeing this. One of the things, when I first went to work here at UCO, my office was over in Thatcher Hall. I've had like 16 different offices here on campus over the years. My office was in Thatcher Hall, and I was in the economics hallway. And the woman across the hall from me taught the basic introductory to economics class. And I got so sick of hearing this every single year, that demand is the entire curve and supply is the entire curve. So pricing constraints with regard to consumer demand, you can have shifts in the demand curve, and when that happens, that's different than moving along, and this is hard to see. You have quantity demanded on this axis and price, and generally speaking, the lower the price, the more quantity is going to be demanded by consumers. But you can have a shift in the curve, and that will increase. If it's a shift to the right, there will be more demand at every price point along the curve. Now, what can lead to a shift in demand to the right as opposed to a shift in demand to the left? And again, that's not movement along the supply curve. It's at every point along the curve, you will have more demanded. Well, consumers can get more money. You were going to say something, yes.
Incentives.
Okay. You think that incentives can move? I think incentives may be movement along the demand curve as opposed to a shift in the demand curve, right? Because what you're doing is you're basically decreasing the price for the consumer, and so they can afford more of the product, maybe. If you have an increase in economic wealth, and this has happened recently, even though we've had this pandemic, and even though we've had, it's sort of counterintuitive, and even though we've had this trade war with China, people have actually had a lot more discretionary income, which has caused a shift. If you had a job, which has caused a shift in demand to the right of lots of products, because people were stuck at home during the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah, since I own a collectibles business, my sales have increased drastically during the pandemic, just because, and as well with all the other dealers in military collectibles, just because so many people are, like you said, are at home and are getting, like, I guess, are reading more about the hobby and are definitely getting more involved. Like I'm saying, like maybe 2-3 times more in sales, and plus value, like prices are going up as well in the collectible market.
Right.
Like I'm sure you saw, like maybe like I think earlier this year that Mario game. It broke a world record, sold for like $1.5 million.
Right. Yeah.
So it just kind
It's because people have all this money that they've saved up. If you had a job during the pandemic and you couldn't spend it, I have these friends of mine that they eat out, or did prior to the pandemic, almost every single meal.
Oh, in the stock market
And
the first part of this year as well.
Yeah, the stock market has gone crazy. They ate out almost every single meal. And they like to go out to eat, and they like to go out and drink things that it's just like annoying to me. Like cocktails, I have very definite ideas about. I grew up, my father was an FBI agent, and I grew up on a cattle ranch, and I think cocktails should be like what, the Marlboro man would drink, which is bourbon and branch, right? 2 ingredients, bourbon and branch. By the way, nobody knows what that is anymore. Bourbon and branch is the name of the cocktail for bourbon and water, okay? Gin and tonic. That's what a cocktail should be. I want cherry sour, cranberry crush, ice cream lemonade, vodka swirl. No. Like 2 ingredients, bourbon and water, vodka and tonic, gin and tonic, something like that. But they stayed at home because of COVID for so long, because restaurants were closed and you couldn't go out and you couldn't get a purple appletini margarita swirl. And so they had all this money, and so they have all this discretionary income now, and things like home supplies shifted to the right because people were now interested in like home improvements on their house, buying collectibles, things like that. And so you had this shift in the entire curve, and more people were demanding. If you have a recession, generally what you'll have is you'll have a shift to the left, where at every point along the curve, you will have lower demand. And it's come back. Wow. Pricing constraints, cost of production and marketing. Over the long term, you have to cover your costs or you will go out of business. The newness of the product life cycle is a constraint. When new products are introduced into the market, generally speaking, they're priced lower in order to stimulate demand. Now, that's not always true. But generally, particularly with consumer packaged goods, a pricing constraint is that you're going to have to penetrate the market. People are already committed to the brands that they like in many instances. And you're going to have to try and change that. And so that's a constraint. A single product versus a product line. Are you just selling one thing or are you selling lots? Again, going back to my example of AEC, we sold lots of titles. We had something like over 575 titles when I left the company. We were trying to sell all of those and make all of those product titles marketable or profitable. The costs of changing prices in the time. Historically, this has been very difficult. This is not so difficult in a modern age where computers can engage in demand surge pricing. And it's done using airline prices change rapidly. If you get online and you search for airline tickets this morning and you don't purchase your tickets and you wait until after 5, the price may have changed because the demand has changed and they have these dynamic pricing models in the airline industry. Hotels are now using this. They can tell when things are peaking and when they can charge more for rooms. And so historically, it took a long time to change prices. In the past, there was something called the Wish Book. You used to be able to buy all kinds of stuff from Sears and Roebuck. That was the company that produced the Wish Book, was Sears and Roebuck. You could buy everything under the sun in the Sears and Roebuck catalog. And I remember people used to wait every year for the Wish Book to come out. You could buy entire homes from Sears and Roebuck. Guthrie, my hometown, is full of these little homes that you could buy. They're Victorian homes. You could buy them and order them. They were kits that you bought from Sears and Roebuck. And we have a lot of these homes. We have the largest preserve of them in the nation in Guthrie. And they're called shotgun homes. And the reason they're called shotgun homes is because you could stand on the front porch and shoot roosters in the backyard without hitting anybody or anything in the house. You could go straight through. Why were they built this way? They were built this way so that you could have good cross ventilation in the summers. In the Victorian era, when these houses were sold by Sears and Roebuck, people didn't have air conditioning. What did they rely on? Opening the doors. What's it not, pleasant in Oklahoma inside during June and July and August because it's generally hot and sticky, right? So they built these homes. You could order those from Sears and Roebuck. You could order, and you can still do this not from Sears and Roebuck, but I'm fascinated by this. They've started doing it again. They used to ship live poultry to you. Sears and Roebuck did. They were the first ones to start doing this. You can now buy live poultry online and they'll ship it to you. It seems rather cruel to me to do this. They pack little chicks into stuff and they ship them to you. So they would ship live poultry. They would ship all kinds of things. You could buy, I think you could buy donkeys and horses from the Sears and Roebuck catalog at one point in time. And so if you print this catalog, historically, you're committed to that price in the catalog, at least until you print another catalog, right? And so it took a long time. Now, with computers, we can change prices enormously rapidly. The types of competitive market is another one. Gas prices. Gas is a commodity. We don't care whether we get it from Love's or Buc-ee's, or any of you been to Buc-ee's? I love Buc-ee's. Like Buc-ee's, I go to Texas a lot, and you can get everything that you need at Buc-ee's. It's like an incredible place. Like if you're going to a kid's party, I've been bought stuff at Buc-ee's for kids' parties. They have Melissa and Doug stuff at Buc-ee's. It's incredible. But with regard to gas, people don't care whether or not they go to Buc-ee's or they go to Love's or they go to Conoco or any of these other companies, right? They're looking for the cheapest prices. So if you have a highly competitive market and all of these gas stations compete and they all know what their prices are, and it just floats, right? And there's not going to be a huge variance between gas station A and gas station B on opposite corners, because if one of them lowers their prices, the other's going to have to lower their price. Otherwise, people won't go there. Nobody cares. Now, they've tried to distinguish. Chevron, for example, tried to say, we've got cleaner gas. Nobody cares. In reality, they just don't. They don't perceive that as being a price differential value maker. And so the type of competitive market for years and years and years, yeah, go
I
ahead.
was gonna say, I know up north between Come and Go's and Casey's,
Uh-huh.
those are big in with people on choosing one or the other.
They actually
Yeah.
like compete. I'd be willing to bet if the price goes beyond 5 cents, there's not gonna be a huge. I mean, like if you're paying more than 5 cents difference in a gallon of gas, I'd be willing to bet it's not even 5 cents, and people would go to the other. Right? I mean, I don't know. Maybe they are. There's an example in Stillwater. There were two guys for years and years when my brother was a student in Stillwater who owned all of the gas stations in Stillwater. And the gas prices in Stillwater were always about 10 cents higher than everywhere else in the state. And they met every week and had breakfast, and remarkably, the prices were always the same. Is that price fixing? That's illegal, by the way, but trying to prove it is very, very difficult. But they didn't have, that's one example where you had gas stations where they didn't have a competitive market, because people are not willing to drive 30 or 40 miles out of their way, right, to get a tank of gas. If you live in Stillwater, it's kind of an isolated area. There's not a lot around it. The smaller towns are probably not going to be any less expensive than others.
Some gas stations don't have the option of getting like the no ethanol.
Oh, yeah, that is a different, and that does make a difference actually, because a lot of people do not want ethanol in their vehicle. If you own a boat, you cannot run blended fuel, and it will destroy your motor. If you have a Wave Runner or anything like that, it will destroy the motor. They tell you not to run any blended fuel in it. But that is one thing that does make a difference, is if it's 100% pure gas versus blended fuel. So, but for the most part, fuel is fuel. People will pay what is the cheapest price. So estimating revenue. Total revenue equals the price times the quantity that you sell. Average revenue is the total revenue divided by the quantity. Again, my business is a good example of this, because we have different numbers of people that come between, and during COVID, we had to restrict the number of people that came to the murder mysteries to 20 to 22 from 40. There's a big difference there in terms of the revenue, the average revenue per night that we would reap versus when we had 40 people. Marginal revenue is the change that results from producing one additional unit of the product. What does it cost you to produce one additional unit? At some point, there are economies of scale, but if you have to produce one more unit and you have to build an entirely new factory, the marginal revenue can change dramatically. Price elasticity, a change in the quantity demanded divided by the change in the price. Inelastic, or let's start with elastic, an increase in the price results in a large decrease in demand. Now, your textbook, I don't know if the current edition says this, but at least the last edition did, said that gas prices were inelastic. So inelastic, a 1% increase in price produces less than a 1% decrease in demand. I don't know if I agree with that. They said that gas prices are inelastic. And to some extent, that's true. We all have to drive to work. But when gas prices start to reach, and I have all of these products that consume large amounts of gas, like I've had a large boat, I have an airplane now that consumes a voluminous amount of gas. When gas prices, and I had this big boat, hit $5 a gallon, and they did at one point in time, On the road, that meant the gas prices on the lake were about $8 to $10 a gallon, and there was far more sitting around the marina during that time. The boat that I had would take 200 gallons of fuel at a time. It had 2 individual tanks, one for each motor. It had Volvo Pentas, 100 gallons for the port and 100 gallons for the starboard side. When I was selling the boat, one guy came out and he said, "How many miles to the gallon do you get on this?" And I'm like, if you're asking that question, this is not the boat for you. First of all, there are no miles to gallon in boating, right? It depends. And if you're asking that, I mean, it can be gallons per second. You could get the boat I had, it was 36 feet long. It had 2 staterooms, and you could get it up on plane and going about 45 miles an hour across smooth water on the lake. And at that, you're burning about, 20 gallons a minute to do that. So it's not economically feasible. When gas gets to be about $5, all of a sudden it's $10 on the lake, and there's a whole lot of sitting on the dock and fishing going on, and far less running around on wave runners and stuff like that. Unitary is if you have a 1-for-1, and you had a comment?
Gas prices are inelastic in short term, more than long term.
To an extent. Everybody has to drive, yes, and the book says that, everybody has to drive to work. But actually you don't anymore, because now a lot of people have the option of working from home as a result of COVID. And so if you can avoid driving, you will. The other thing that happens is when gas prices reach about $4 a gallon, what people start doing, first of all, there's a decrease in the number of deaths. Once you get above $3.50, for every 10 cents on the gallon that price increases, the number of highway deaths and highway fatalities decreases exponentially. Why is that? People start doing things like they don't accelerate as fast as they once did. They don't drive as fast as they did. And you do things at about $3.50 a gallon, you start doing things like you start planning. If I'm gonna have to go out and I'm gonna go to work, I'm going to hit the grocery store on my way back from work rather than going home, changing my clothes, relaxing and then going to the grocery store. People start planning their trips. And so you do see decreases in demand. The other thing that happens is things like airline travel decreases. If there's a huge increase in gas prices, the number of travelers traveling for pleasure, business travelers still have to travel, decreases. So I think it's actually pretty elastic, although the text has historically said that it's an inelastic because people have to have it. That's true to a certain extent. You have to go at least to work historically. Not so true anymore, right? You can stay at home, you can choose to telework and things like that. Arriving at the price, the final price. Demand-oriented pricing. Used by innovators is a technique called skimming. Apple does this, right? They charge a high initial price, and it's like skimming the cream off the milk, because there's a lot of demand for things like that. Apple has a huge reputation. When they release new products, there's a lot of interest in them historically, and they can skim. The opposite of skimming is penetration pricing. If you're going to release a new cereal product to the market, there's lots of competition out there. People are pretty brand loyal. If you are one of those people that likes Frosted Flakes, you're probably not going to change. Or if you like Frosted Mini Wheats, things like that, you're probably not going to change. It's going to take you some incentive to get those people to try your product. Prestige pricing is the example I already gave you, which is Tag Heuer increased the prices of their watch from $500 to $1,000. All of a sudden at $1,000, it looks more like Rolex, and their prices actually increased. Historically speaking, if you increase your prices, demand goes down, but not necessarily. Price lining assumes that demand is inelastic between price points. So you'll sell slacks, for example, at $35, $45, and $55, depending on, sort of quality of the fabric, how heavy the wool is, things like that. And what you're assuming is that between those price points that you have inelastic demand, right? That it's between them, there's not a lot of elasticity. Odd even pricing is used by a lot of companies so that you perceive the value as being something less than $5.99. It's less than $6. Targeting. This is where you estimate what you think the consumer will pay and then you back into the price. You go out and you do research as to what people will pay for a product, and then you back into that price and you figure out whether or not you can produce the product at that price. We actually did this a lot in the company that I worked for. We would go out and we would ask school districts what they were willing to pay for various titles and do research on that. And then we would see if we could back into that price using our development team to get to the price that most school districts would actually pay. Bundle pricing, getting home internet, cable, and telephone together, right? If you have a landline anymore, probably it's because you have some bundle pricing, because why would anybody have a landline when you've got this wonderful device that's constantly connected to your hand and you can use it at any time and you don't have to, be at home to use it. Yield management, that's dynamic pricing like airlines and hotels do, where they update prices based on algorithmic models, and it happens enormously quickly. You can have cost-oriented pricing. This is what supermarkets use. It's a standard markup. Homeland has come up with a division of their stores for areas that are less affluent than others, and they call it their cost plus. So they have a line of grocery stores called Cash Savers. There's one in Guthrie. It used to be a Homeland, and they've converted it to a Cash Saver, where it's just a standard markup. They give you the absolute base price plus 10% markup. You could have profit-oriented, where you target a particular profit. I actually knew somebody who did this. He owned the donut shop in Guthrie, and this was years and years and years ago in the 1980s, when $30,000 was quite a bit of money. And he figured out he wanted to make $30,000 a year, and he figured out how many donuts he had to sell and at what price to get to that profit. And then he sold that number of donuts in the donut shop. It was remarkable. The donut shop was open every day at like 5 a.m. and it closed depending on the day and when he ran out of, when he sold the last donut or sold the last few donuts. Target return on investment, where you target, you say, this is what I have to have in order to get the return on my investment. A target return on sales, where you try and increase your sales. So you provide incentives for sales, for your sales force to go out and sell, for example, and you want to try and increase sales by a certain amount. If you have competitive oriented pricing, that's where you have customary. What's the customary price? Well, in vending machines, the customary price has historically been a certain, dollar value. Historically, vending machines were like, what is it to get a bottle of Coke out of the vending machine? It's like $1.25, right? And that's pretty much the standard price that you're going to find at all vending machines in areas where they don't have some kind of exclusivity to the market, where it's not, a convenience product. So you have like this customary price point that people are willing to pay. People are willing to pay about $1.25, $1.50 for stuff out of a vending machine. At, above, or below pricing, where you price at or below a competitor. This is usually a competitive pricing model. Walmart used to do this. They used to go comp shop. And you don't have to do this anymore, but they used to go comp shop, and then they price their products below what their competitors in the region were pricing. And then you can have loss leaders. This is where you price something that is a staple that people need in order to try and get them in. Supermarkets do this a lot. They'll price something really, really cheap, and then they put that product, it's usually a staple type product, at the back of the store, and they hope that you'll go in when you're hungry and you'll walk past all of these other things that they have a higher markup or a higher margin on. Any questions about price? All right, so Thursday, I will have the third exam up. It will not include the channels because we didn't have time to get to that today. If you feel cheated because I'm letting you go 15 minutes early, you let me know, and on Tuesday, we'll stay 15 minutes late. I never have anybody take me up on that offer. I don't know why. I think I'm a brilliant personality, but apparently you all would rather go hang with your friends or play Fortnite or something else. If you got ducks, come see me. So I can give you your